Okay. The uranium boom in the mid 70s to early 80s had quite a price boom. Westinghouse, however, had sold a bunch of nuclear reactors and guaranteed to supply them fuel at $8 a pound, had been the price for a long time. Well, suddenly the price of uranium took off. Westinghouse tried to get out of that deal, but they couldn't. The courts upheld the $8 a pound price that they'd guaranteed. So Westinghouse did two things. They first called out their lawyers and sued everybody that was producing uranium in the old days. And the second thing, they got Wyoming Mineral, which they owned, to start looking for uranium. Well, they sued on the grounds that uranium producers at the time were price fixing and had collusion going. Conoco hadn't been involved in the uranium business at the early days, but they had been very successful in finding a lot more uranium, and it was very economic at the projected prices. I joined Conoco in '77 as project engineer for the Crown Point project. What follows is a description of a very interesting project. Unfortunately, it was touched by the fickle finger of fate. If any of you folks ever watched Laugh-In, you'll remember that term. Westinghouse's lawyers were successful in getting all the uranium they needed at cheap prices. They found collusion. A major oil company was developing a major uranium mine, forgot to burn some records, and it was a smoking gun. The other thing was 3 Mile Island happened at the same time, and that pretty well killed the nuclear industry. Now, the only good thing that I can say about it is at the time they shut us down, we were about 2 months ahead of schedule and $16 million under budget. Could we have the next slide, please? We got the next one up. That's the project was located almost in the town of Crown Point, which is in northwest New Mexico. It's about 60 miles from Grants or Gallup, depending whether you go east or west, about 150 miles from Albuquerque. Crown Point is known for its quarterly auction of Navajo rugs. It's a good place to go if you want to get a nice Navajo rug straight from the source. Next slide, please. Signed by our entrance, which we put up just about the time we were closing it down. Next slide. Conoco's mineral holdings. They had all of it except for the southeast quarter of section 24 was Indian allotted lands, which not quite it doesn't quite mean as reservation lands, but darn close to it. The southeast quarter of section 24 had a little L-shaped box in it, and that belonged to somebody else. But the rest of it was private land, which Conoco owned. That was very valuable because we didn't have to go through an environmental impact statements or environmental assessment. Next slide, please. Stratigraphic column of Crown Point. Generally, the sandstones were wet, the shales were dry, barren of mineralization, would turn to mush when they got wet. And the coal seams that you see near the surface were pretty worthless. They had a lot of mixed up sand and shale in them. Next slide, please. The ore occurs in the Westwater sandstone. It's a very prolific aquifer. At Crown Point, they basically was artesian. The water would rise up within about 200 feet of the surface. It was very good quality water. There's about 250 parts per million solids in it, TDS. There's a lot of it. Next slide, please. This is a typical sketch of the mining, of a uranium mining thing. One thing to emphasize, which is shown on the next slide. Next slide, please. Is the importance of ventilation. In the Ambrosia Lake area, the uranium was fairly close to the surface, so you could put random vent holes down where you needed them. However, at Crown Point, because of the depth of the ore, which was 1,800 to 2,000 feet generally, you couldn't punch vent holes down all over like you could otherwise. So we proposed putting in a series of vent tunnels, drifts underneath the surface, and have the vent shaft connect into that. Basically, it was driving drifts and waste strictly for the ventilation. We allowed about 10,000 cubic feet of air for every working phase. Next slide. This slide and the next one show what we proposed doing. This was an earlier one. We deviated a little bit, but basically we were going to drill one 10-foot diameter hole, case it with 85-inch ID casing, and then drill two 6-foot holes, case them with 3-foot ID casing. We would use the first shaft to hoist up muck from the other two. We would slab down on the holes, let the muck go down below, and hoist it up the small service shaft. Also, water would be handled in the same manner. The first thing we'd be doing would be putting a pump station in. As you can see on the right side of this thing, we see a pump station about the 1450 level. There's a little layer of dry sand there that served everybody for the same purpose. They'd put their intermediate pump station in. Next slide. This is the rest of the development of the mine as we would start stations on the new levels and start development of them. Next slide. One key thing in drilling shafts is the mud program. Earlier shafts that were drilled there had a lot of problem with the shales falling off, and you had so much weight on the bit by the time lifting it up that you almost were unable to lift the thing up. Somebody discovered that potassium inhibited the slacking of the shales, and basically it was just potash and water. And the net result was you had a nice smooth hole with smooth sides, didn't have any caving. The one thing that was interesting, the 13 3/8 inch drill pipe would be filled with water right from the top. You had a high pressure air line going down the drill pipe for about 250 feet, high pressure air, and it created a good pump system. We pumped out rather large rocks. There's one that got jammed in the gooseneck that was about 18, 20 inches long, 6 inches in diameter, sort of a heart-shaped thing. Next slide, please. This is a site before we started, right at the start of 1980 as we started. The next slides are just basically the progress that we had along the way. We first had to construct mud tanks to settle the mud from the drilling, and you see those under construction here with the steel sides. Next slide. More construction of the mud tanks. Next slide. The drillers needed what they called a conductor tube. Miners would call it a shaft column. We had to drill one that was 10 foot in diameter to accommodate the drill bit and 55 to 60 feet deep to accommodate it. Here we are putting it in, conventional shaft sinking, nothing exotic there. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. While all this was going on, we had a lot of dirt work going on. The mine water had to be settled and treated also before it could be discharged. So here we are constructing the settling ponds. Next slide. Shaft collar going in that served as a drill pad for the number one shaft. Next slide. Settling ponds graded, ready to line. Next slide. Here we are lining them, sort of a felt underliner with neoprene type lining on top of it. Next slide. Now comes the drill rig, and here we are assembling it. The next few slides will show us assembling that. You'll just run through them slowly, Barbara. We'll just go to when I say whoa. Whoa. Substructure, as I noted here, is different than your oil field substructures, and the fact you didn't have to worry about blowout prevention. We didn't anticipate any gas in the 2,000 feet that we're going to be drilling. Well, that made that a lot lower to the ground. You only had a 6-foot substructure instead of 30 feet. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next. There she's going up. Next slide. And this rig was a pretty good size when, if you were in the oil patch, you'd be putting down holes around 20,000 feet or so. Next slide. There's the drill assembly, 360,000 pounds weight. The drill pipe is 13 3/8 inch diameter. At the time, that is the biggest available. Well, most of the weight on this project was kept in tension. We could have put more weight on the bit. That would have resulted in a crooked hole, would have gotten a lot faster. A couple other companies before us had tried drilling shafts, and they put a lot of weight on the bit and had crooked holes. The first one used the hole as a center line, and they had such a crooked hole that the state mine inspector wouldn't allow them to do anything except use it for ventilation. The next company that did that had sense enough to survey the hole and outline their shaft so that it fit within where the holes had hit. The hole was crooked, but they had a straight shaft that sank on it. The first one, the crooked one, they used the shaft as center line, the drilled hole. And when it was all over with, they had this crooked vent hole. They promoted the superintendent to manager. Go figure. Any rate, next slide. There's the drill bit when it came out for the final time. Now, if any of you have been to Grants and seen the mining museum, this is on exhibit in the front of the building. It's kind of an interesting history behind it. It was bought along with some other stuff from a junk dealer who had bought it at the Nevada test site. Well, this drill bit alone was 10-foot diameter, and there's enough life left from those cutters that we could use it. And the final 200 foot of the shaft was drilled with this. It saved us about $50,000 for new cutters on the other bits that we had. So it more than paid for the pile of junk that we bought. I think we paid the dealer $9,000. And we got that and some 6-foot bits that we used in the other hole, especially for a fishing tool. Any rate, next slide. We ran calipers down to make sure that we didn't have any pockets or anything. And it turned out that it was a very good hole. It looked almost like a shotgun barrel. Next slide. The casing was hydrostatically designed. Overall, there's about 7 million pounds of steel in the number one shaft, about 3,500 tons. I don't think a Brundon compass would work too well around it. The wall thickness varied, and the stiffener rings that you see on it were 4 inches thick, 5 inches high. And you also notice some pipes welded to the side of it. That was for the grout tubes. Next slide. This drawing of all the shaft lining things. This was produced by an outside firm. Complete drawing of all the lining in the shaft. Next one. Before we started running any casing, we wanted to have all the pieces there. It would be nothing worse than to have a breakdown in the place making the casing and have to have the drill rig and standby time on it just before we could finish the hole. So we wanted to have all the casing there. Next slide. Here it is running the casing. The rig could handle a 40-foot length. The casing came in 20-foot lengths, so 2 pieces were welded on the ground, and the other weld is made of, so pipe was held up by the rig. All the welds were x-rayed. Next one, please. And of course, they had to be cemented in. There's a cement plant for cementing it in. Next. During this time, we were constructing the collar and conductor tube for the second shaft, but it was going to be the service shaft and production shaft. So it took a little more design and engineering for it. We were working about as fast as the drawings were coming in from Denver. Next shaft, next one. Collar, more of the collar construction. It was a rather elaborate collar. Next one. More of the collar construction. Next. We had one break though, with the 6-foot diameter holes that was needed for the conductor tubes. We were able to drill them with an auger drill. They didn't make an auger drill big enough to drill the 10-footer, but they did for the 6, and that saved a lot of time and money. Next. Putting in the man tunnel. Reason we had a man tunnel there, Crown Point's at about 7,000 feet above sea level, just basically on the continental divide. It gets cold as all get out in the wintertime and get a lot of wind. So we had a man tunnel so we wouldn't freeze people to death. Next one. There we are casing the second shaft. Casing the third was much the same. You get a better view of the route guides there. Next. Again, running the casing in. Next. There's the collar and conductor tube for the third shaft. Ready for the drill to come over. Next. And we move the drill rig masked up just with a dozer over to the third hole. Next. Well, there's a summary of what we did. The first shaft, 10-foot diameter, bottom was 1.03 feet off center, depth 2,243 feet. Number 2 was 6-foot diameter. That was the most crooked. It was 1.33 feet off center. Drilled to 2188. Same for the third. It was drilled same depth, but it was pretty accurate. 84 hundredths off center. Next. Well, there's the rig demobilizing. It was on site for 363 days and drilled the 3 shafts. Next. We brought a mining contractor in to equip the first shaft and do the development work. Here he is setting up his stuff, his head frame. And you'll notice he did it in conical red and white, same as the drill rig. Next. One of the things that saved a lot of time and effort on the shaft was the way we were going to equip it. We took this channel iron, had it rolled to the 85-inch diameter, and put all the brackets in for the pipes necessary. Usually in shaft sinking, it's a real pain trying to get the cutouts for the things to hold the sets to hold the equipping stuff. But here it was easy. We had a dry hole with steel walls, and just tack weld them in. Next. This is a view of the cage that did the equipping of the shaft. Now this picture was taken just as they were starting to equip the shaft, which happened to be on the day they told us to shut her down. Next. A lot of work went on while the drilling was going on. We were going to be using a lot of concrete, so we bought and set up our own batch plant. Next. Substation, construction of that. Next. There's a completed substation. Next. Air compressors and generators. This was a fun project. The fact that's the only time in my working career I was able to buy new equipment that didn't have to go through the junk list of old stuff. We had new air compressors and generators. Power outage would have been catastrophic with the amount of water that the mine made. So we needed the facilities to quickly switch over to auxiliary power. PNM, Public Service Company, failed us. Next. Basically, we built a building around the equipment after it was put in. Next. There's a almost finished building. Next. Change house. We had an entrance to the man tunnel. I regret I don't have a picture of the completed one. It was a very nice one. We had divided up dry with one side for your dirty clothes, the other side with your clean clothes. We had both for men and women. Next. Contractor setting his hoist and stuff. Next. There's what she looked like on the day they told us to shut her down. As you notice, we had all the buildings in place and everything. The shutdown was a pretty orderly one. We were told to shut her down on the 23rd of March and have it done by the 1st of July, which we did. We completed all the buildings, got the equipment in properly warehoused and everything. And it was a little different than the orderly shutdown that a major project had in Colorado on the oil shale. Any rate, that's today. Crown Point has changed ownership. If you'll put the next one on, Barbara. Now belongs to Hydro Resources. Westinghouse got the property. Conoco gave Westinghouse the property since Westinghouse had paid all the bills to date. And Westinghouse sold it. They proposed doing in situ leaching. Whether that happens or not, wait to be seen. Next. This is what it looks like today, well, 5 years ago when I was last out there. This is the #1 shaft and our office building in the back. Next. The head frame, the hoist saw new life. This is at Energy Fuels Nuclear here in near south of Grand Canyon, near Tucson. This was the head frame I ordered. I never got to see it until I went out to see it at Energy Fuels Nuclear. It was a pile of structural steel the last time I saw it. Next. There's the hoist that we bought for the project. I last saw it on the shop floor at Nordberg in Milwaukee, and it's now in use. Next. Well, that's it, folks. That's all there is. I'll answer any question you may have. And thanks, Barbara, for bailing me out of this high technology fiasco.
That's okay.
Anybody got any questions?
Bill, let me ask how, if you had gotten into production, what were you expecting to be pumping?
As I remember, we had designed up to about 10,000 GPM. We didn't expect to pump that much, but we were ready for it.
Okay, yeah. A lot of water.
It is. And unfortunately, we couldn't use it. Had to turn it down to the creek. A rather interesting little sideline. Usually when you put a deep well pump down, you figure on expending one because of all the cuttings in the hole. Well, we got the bright idea not to use the high pressure air that the drill rig had. So we drilled a hole for the deep well pump. And instead of putting a Rita pump down to wear out just to clean the hole out, we airlifted it out. Worked fine. And the water going down the creek. Everybody, the local people asked if it was water safe, and I said, yeah, it's coming out of the same aquifer you're drinking. Well, we found out about a month later after the assays came in, it was hotter than hell with uranium. What we'd done, we'd set up an oxidation column, pumping all that air down there. But there weren't any glowing sheep or anything, so I guess everything turned out okay. Any other questions? Well, I guess if any of you saw,
I have one. Bill, what did it feel like to have to shut down something everybody put their heart and soul into? I mean, what did it feel like?
it feels awful, but Crown Point had a lot of starts and stops along the way. I wrote a feasibility study, and we tried to. Conoco shut us down once. They even tried to sell the property out from under us. One of their vice presidents went out on his own trying to do it. Wasn't the smartest thing, but it was discouraging. However, when you look back, it was quite a blessing in disguise because we were the first one to do it. And about 6 months later, everybody else was shutting down, and I was able to sell my house at a decent price, move on to a decent job in the oil shale. You know, another loser, but when you're out of a job, you cling on to the first thing you see. No, it's not a nice feeling.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Bill.
Well, sorry
Yay.
that the technology didn't work out. As Ferris Bueller would have said at the end of his movie, that's all, folks, go home.
Well, we still have some time if people want to unmute and turn on your cameras so we can see everybody.
Yeah.
I'm glad we have some new people here for the MHA Nuggets who haven't been with us before, so welcome. And then we've still there's about 5 or 6 people watching on YouTube also. If anybody wants to do a presentation, I still have October and November available. I am in talks with somebody for September. But you know, I'll take anybody who wants to present something, please. But otherwise we can.
Yeah, I've got a question, if I may, Barbara.
Yeah.
Yeah, the technology that you use to drill these wells, where did that technology kind of develop? It wasn't oil well technology, was it?
Well, it's outgrowth of oil well technology. It was came from the atomic bomb program. When they quit testing bombs in the air, they went underground, and it was pretty expensive to sink shafts conventionally. So they got the oil people in it, and several outfits became pretty proficient at it. Phoenix and Sisson were one, F&S. They drilled a majority of them, but they drilled some pretty impressive holes. As I remember, one, and I think it was up in Lucians in Alaska, was something like 5,000 feet deep, 54-inch diameter. But all these holes were drilled to test things. And interesting side note, after the drill rig finished up at Crown Point, he went down to Carlsbad and drilled the shaft there for the waste isolation pilot project. So it saw some more use in New Mexico.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
There's a
The number
complete
one
record of the
shaft-
drilling project at the Montana School of Mines. I donated my library to them, and I presume they have it there. Maybe it's already made its way to the trash can. New Mexico didn't want it, so I gave it to Montana.
The 10-foot shaft, what was the maximum diameter casing you could have put in that 10-foot shaft?
Well, as it turned out, as straight as the hole was, we probably could have put in an 8-foot diameter very easy and had room to spare. You have to have the OD, of course, is going to be bigger because you have those stiffener rings in there and you have the grout guide tubes. So you couldn't do it all 10 foot, but you do a lot better than what we did. It was so straight that you could actually turn the casing in the hole before we cemented it in.
Okay,
Interesting.
thank you.
I was going, has Keith mapped this yet?
Not yet, not yet. No, we've got our hands on some mines in the Republic of Ireland that we're working on at the minute. So.
Hey, Keith, did anything come of the discussion you were having with Ed Rains on Creed?
I'm afraid to say that one at the moment has drawn a blank, but thanks to Richard from the conference, it looks like I'm in the process of producing a video for the Tonopah mining park, which will have my models on it and stuff. And if anyone goes to Tombstone at any stage, you'll see more of the animations there. And it looks like it's going to end up in the museum at Sterling Hill in New Jersey as well. So
That's great.
it's nice. It'll be nice that if nothing else, I mean, I might say I don't really take much credit for the models. It's important. It's more important that the history is actually presented to people. You know, I think that's, you know, I just have the ability to do it. You know, and as long as it gets to a wider audience, then that's got to be good for everyone, isn't it? You know, at the end of the day, that's what our mining history is about, is trying to sort of, you know, show not just mining people like ourselves who are interested, but sort of those who don't share our passion, shall we say.
If you were to make this operational again, what would be the time and how much effort would be necessary?
That's to you, Bill.
What's that?
If you were to make this operational again, and what would be the time and expense to do that?
The time is mostly dependent on permitting these days. This one, being that you had some private land, was a lot faster. However, it was not in an optimum position. We originally wanted to do the work on section 29, but because of the fact it would have required an environmental impact statement, that kind of killed it. Drilling the shaft, now that you know what it is, I'm saying a sedimentary formation, it's a good way to go. I wouldn't try to do it in igneous or metamorphic rock. It'd probably be a difficult job. I think they did try to do one in Australia, and it was pretty slow going. But costs, back then, miners were getting about $8 an hour. So today, I don't know. It would take a little work to figure
Well,
out.
I mean, if the holes you've already got, I mean, if you took this installation you've already
Okay,
done.
if we went back to Crown Point to do it, at the time we were, it was a $64 million project. And we spent about, I can't remember, but it seemed to me it was about 20 million we might have spent. So, you know, for another 40 million of dollars of the day then. The one problem we have is nobody makes equipment that suitable for uranium mines. Everything they figure is going to be bigger openings. Well, that's a catastrophe in a uranium mine. You need small openings. If you remember the presentation that we had during the annual meeting of the Mount Taylor mine, you saw some of the problems that we're having there, the steel sets getting crushed and everything. In the typical other uranium mines, they had, say, 6x8 to 8x8 drifts. You didn't have a big problem in supporting the ground, but when you start opening them up to 12x12, it's tough. So I think you'd have problem getting the equipment, because in those days you used a fairly slow drilling machine like a JR38 that put a lot of water out to flush the cuttings. Well, Ingersoll Rand decided that they weren't going to make those anymore. They were going with the high impact, high speed JR300s, which really weren't suitable for the sandstone. And most of the equipment they went to bigger equipment where you can't fit in. So it's a tough situation. I don't think you could open one up today.
You know, what's the difference between the way those 10 and 6 foot diameter holes are drilled, and if you go with a small or a moderate hole and then raise bore it back, you know, drill it back in reverse? What's the difference there?
Well, that could work, but remember, you got to go through some pretty nasty wet formations that could come in on you, and raise boring might be a problem doing that because you don't have the steel liner to protect you. It'll take a little, it could be done, but it'll be difficult. One of the problems we had kind of shows you get what you pay for, but one of the people in Wyoming Mineral was very upset at the fact we had this #1 shaft wasn't really going to be used in the scheme of things after the mine is developed. It just bothered him. And he was bemoaning his thing to another well-known PhD mining engineer in a bar. And it was suggested that we sink a bigger shaft, a 26-foot diameter shaft with a curtain wall in it. Well, the ground there that would have been mission impossible. The ground was so soft. I looked at some of the cores that came out of the hole, and I could shove a pencil through the core. And you can imagine if you had a 26-foot diameter hole to try to support it before it came in around you, if you have rock with that stability, that you can put a Pentel pencil through it.
So you got one shot at it. Do it right. Do it quick. Get it cased and be done with it. And don't dilly dally.
Yeah, that's about it.
Anything
Any
else?
other thoughts?
Good presentation, Bill. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Well, glad to do it. I'm sorry that next time, if you ever have me back, I'll make sure that the darn technology works. I'll make sure I have one of my grandsons here to coach me through it.
Well, we got it done. Well, thank you all for coming, and we will see you next month. Bye-bye.
Right.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Good
Good to
night.
see you.